You're listening to Behind the Sermon from Three Crosses Church. What does John mean when he says that we have received grace in place of grace? Some translations say grace in place of grace, and others say grace upon grace. At first glance, the difference may seem small, but it reveals the ways in which God has been gracious and our relationship with the law. Hello and welcome to Behind the Sermon. This week we are looking at John 1:16 and one of the most debated phrases in the prologue to John's Gospel. Out of his fullness we have all received grace in place of grace already given. Now we're really only talking about 3 words in their original language. The first and last words are both grace. They just look a little bit different because the endings of Greek nouns change depending on their role in the sentence. The question is, what is this word in the middle? Well, it is anti. Anti is a preposition. Now, a preposition is a word that shows the relationship between things. So in the sentence, the cat is on the table, the word on is a preposition, and it shows the relationship between the cat and the table. The cat is on the table. In our phrase, anti is a preposition showing the relationship between one grace and another grace. But what is the relationship? Some think that it should be translated upon. So if anti means upon, then John is describing accumulating grace, blessing after blessing, wave after wave. And while it's certainly true that through Jesus we do receive blessing upon blessing, blessing after blessing, it may not be what John means here. The preposition anti doesn't usually mean that. If John had meant to say grace upon grace, it's more likely he would have used the preposition epi. But if anti means instead of, then John is describing replacing grace, one grace giving way to a greater one in Christ. And that's the more normal use of anti in the majority of cases. But word studies alone do not settle meaning, context does. Words get their meaning from how they're used. And in this case, the most important context is the next verse. So we're going to read that. For the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. Now, at first sight, we might understand this to mean that John is saying something negative about the law because grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. But John's Gospel generally views the law positively. In 1:45, the law speaks of Jesus. In 5:46, people are condemned for not believing Moses or not believing the law. So not only is the law viewed positively in the Gospel, but the words grace and truth are used of the law in the Old Testament. So when John's audience read, for the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ, it's unlikely that they would have thought that John meant that the law was not grace and truth. Rather, it's more likely that when we bring all these factors together, John is not contrasting bad law with good grace. He's contrasting earlier grace with a greater grace. So going back to verse 16, out of his fullness we have all received grace in place of grace already given. So out of his fullness refers back to the words grace and truth in verse 14. Out of his fullness we have all received grace, that is the grace and truth of Jesus Christ, and that is in place of the grace already given through Moses. John 1:16 points us to the surpassing grace we have in Christ. On Sunday, we're going to have a lot more to say about the surpassing nature of Jesus Christ, and I'll see you there. Three Crosses Church exists to know and glorify God by being and making disciples who love, trust, and obey Jesus.